Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to Mirror Now. I'm Marti Subramaniam. India is staring at a health crisis, and we need to know where we've gone wrong and how do we fix it. To understand that, Dr. Gagandeep Kang, vaccine expert, virologist, and one of India's foremost and well-reputed health experts, joins us today. Dr. Kang, thank you so much for speaking to Mirror Now. I really do appreciate you taking your time out, and it's voices like yours that really matter at a time like this. Now, undoubtedly, India is facing a huge health crisis. We're having over 2 lakh cases daily. Now, there are two parts of the vaccine containment or the COVID containment policy. Let's start off with vaccinations itself. Have we been too slow and too limited in our approach to vaccinations?
We've reached a situation where we've delivered over 100 million doses of vaccine, and in absolute numbers, that is a very large number of vaccines that have been given to people in our country. But as a proportion of the population, that is about 7% of the population that has received at least 1 dose of the vaccine, and a little over 1% that has got 2 doses of the vaccine. So we really have a very long way to go with the vaccination. We have ramped up over time. We have reached over 3 million doses of vaccine being given in a single day. But if we really want to achieve our goals, we need to at least double this and sustain it over time. 10 million doses of vaccine would be way better and would be something where a daily immunization program could start to make an impact. The other thing we need to think about is, so far we have followed this policy of priority groups and making sure that vaccination is delivered to people based on their risk. And I think it may be time for us to consider whether the goal is the goal of preventing deaths, which it must be for any public health program, but also doing the best we can to decrease transmission of the virus, which means that we should be looking at changing the groups that we are immunizing and potentially beginning to think about immunizing younger people based on professions that might allow them to get infected and to spread disease more.
That's a very, very important point, because there have been a large number of calls now by politicians, by experts, to start expanding the scope of vaccination, to start vaccinating those under 45. But we've received from the government almost a standard response saying that, priority groups need to be vaccinated first. And it's good to actually hear you say that perhaps the government can and should take note. You were mentioning the process of vaccination has been slow. Is it also because we've seen perhaps, or we don't have enough of stock of vaccines? A large number of states are complaining about this. We've had vaccinations halted in a number of states because of this. And perhaps even the government, aware or mindful of that, has decided we need to fast track the approval policy for foreign-made vaccines.
So I think the logistics of delivering a vaccination program, especially a vaccination program for adults that is organized by priority groups, was always going to be a challenge, and the government did the best it could to prepare for that. Because essentially what you're doing is you're saying we will go back to these populations again and again as the priority groups change. First, we will do the healthcare workers, then we will do the over 60s, then we will do the over 45s, then we will do whichever priority group comes next, as opposed to a blanket campaign where you vaccinate everybody who is eligible for vaccination in one area and move on to the next. Now, as I said, the prioritization is essentially intended to protect those who are most at risk of severe disease and death. So the elderly, those with comorbidities. And this has been a global approach. Indonesia has followed a different approach, of wanting to vaccinate its younger population first, because the goal there is to decrease virus transmission as much as possible. I think for us to think about what we want to do in this pandemic and then consider our options is really important. We know that we have about half of our states that are particularly badly affected. Does it make sense to expand vaccination, especially in those states, and then keep moving around, going by where disease is surging, where there is a population that is potentially susceptible, which is information that we can get from sero surveys, and then decide what is most appropriate. Is there enough supply? Serum Institute is making about 2 million doses of vaccine a day. And if we are to immunize, let's say, 8 to 10 million people a day, if we are not short now, we will very shortly not have enough vaccine to be able to deliver to the population. So it needs to be this fine balancing game between what is available and what we need to be able to deliver. This bringing in the permissions for other vaccine companies to provide vaccine in India is excellent. I'm glad it has been done, but I don't think we should think that this is an immediate solution to this month's problem or next month's problem with supply. Serum Institute is one of the biggest manufacturers in the world. And if they have not been able to ramp up their production beyond 2 million vaccines a day, I think there are going to be very few manufacturers that can provide to us vaccines at a scale that India really needs. And then the question really is price, because there is no vaccine in the world that is cheaper than the vaccines that India is buying. So while permissions to import vaccines are good, that does not necessarily mean that we will have the doses we need at the price that we need them at.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it is, of course, a long drawn-out process, but there's been another aspect, Dr. Kang, of our vaccination process, and that is the absence of data. And when I say absence of data, I mean we still don't have a figure of how many people have gotten COVID positive after vaccinations. We don't know how many deaths, if any, are linked to the vaccination process at all. There is an absence of data, and this is a recurring theme that we're seeing not just in this aspect. I'll touch upon the others in just a bit, but does there need to be more transparency when it comes to the effects, the after effects, if any, of vaccination? We've seen, far more greater transparency in other countries when it comes to any vaccine-related complications. So either the government doesn't have the data or they're not willing to share the data.
I completely agree with you that transparency is critical in making people aware of what programs are doing and what they need to be concerned about and what the real risks are. Just having a message that says vaccines are safe, use the vaccines, is simply not good enough in today's day and age. What we really need is real-time data. If you get data that is on the investigation of side effects or deaths that comes 3 months after the vaccination program started, that really has very little value. So just as an example, the US has been looking at what has been happening with their vaccines. They've given out 75 million people have been vaccinated, and in them they have detected less than 6,000 people being positive after being vaccinated. And out of those approximately 5,800 people, about 74 people who were fully vaccinated have died. Now, this sounds terrible. It sounds like a large number, but it's 75 million vaccinated people, and 1 out of a million was not protected against mortality in that set. So I think having data available speaks to how much vaccines really matter and what we need to be doing to monitor the performance of vaccines, not just for safety, as we've seen lately with the AstraZeneca story, with the potential relationship with thrombosis, with low platelet counts. So safety issues need to be monitored with a good surveillance program, and vaccine effectiveness needs to be monitored, like the data from the US that I just mentioned.
Well, Dr. Kang, we've spoken a lot also in the past about genome sequencing. India clearly is reporting new strains of the vaccine, or what is now being called a double mutant of the vaccine. But the genome sequencing that is being done to actually track these new trends in COVID in India is again about 14,000 cases, 14,000 testing of samples has been done. Is that enough, especially to fight an enemy when we really don't know enough about it already? And this perhaps will give us some answers, but yet this is a very slow process, again, like perhaps the vaccination.
Yes. So thanks for that question, Arti. I mean, 14,000 sequences of a virus that we found last year really sounds like a lot, but in terms of our ability to track the spread of the virus in real time, this really is quite limited. Now we've got a change in protocol where it has been said that 5% of all the isolates from each state will be sequenced. And that, I think, is going to be something that is fantastic. It sets up our surveillance system to be able to understand what is happening with this virus much, much more clearly in terms of how infectious the various variants are, in terms of how they are spreading from person to person, and whether vaccines are going to be somewhat less effective against some of the variants than the others. The fact that we didn't sequence earlier was possibly a misstep, but we are making up for that now. And I'm certainly looking forward to the government sharing this data in real time so that it can inform decision-making at the local level. It's very important to understand that the situation that we are in today is a very different one from the one we were in last year. And ensuring that all the data that we need is available to make decisions at the local level is critical. It's not for somebody in Delhi or in a state capital to decide what should be done in a particular district. The district authorities should have all the information available, including genome sequencing, that allows them to make those decisions.
Well, Dr. Kang, I completely appreciate your point. In fact, this is what we've been saying at Mirror Now also for the past many months, that for informed decision making, you need data. Now, we've seen this double mutant strain also being reported in a number of states, which incidentally have reported the highest number of cases, whether it is Punjab, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Delhi. All this while along, the government has been saying that we can't link this double mutant strain to this surge. First of all, what do you make of that response? And if that is not the case, then how are we fighting this battle, again, as you said, in the absence of decisions to make or information to make any informed decision?
So I think one thing that's important to understand is that we actually have all the tools to address spread of the virus, right? Those are public health tools, whether that is prevention of crowding, social distancing, wearing of masks. We know all of this already. Now, in terms of what the genome sequencing and the double mutant adds and how we understand what the double mutant does, really requires us to have three kinds of information. And one is the epidemiological picture, which tells us how the disease is spreading. The second is the clinical picture, which is how badly are people affected, and the two together will tell us which are the populations that are affected and how bad is it. So are younger people being affected? Are you seeing more of the long COVID syndrome? Are the clinical symptoms somewhat different? So all of that information. And then the third component is what you get in the laboratory. One, to answer the question, if people are infected or vaccinated, then are they protected against the new variant or not? And this requires for us to evaluate that particular variant in the laboratory using samples from people who have been infected or vaccinated. Then we also need to understand what is the level of replication of this virus. Is this a virus that can actually spread more easily than other viruses do because it is able to replicate at a much higher level? Now, it requires the combination of all of these sources of data for us to understand how much the virus is likely to affect us today, explain what is happening currently, as well as predict what might happen in the future. We can't do this with one of the three pieces of data. We need for all of them to be linked together to have a full picture and make decisions based on evidence.
I actually, Doctor, want to take you up on two of the things you said. We have the necessary tools, and one of that is prevention of crowding. We're talking at a time when there is a gathering of lakhs and lakhs of people at the Kumbh Mela. We're talking at a time when election campaigning is underway in West Bengal without a care in the world. When you see these type of mass gatherings which are organized and sanctioned by political parties, political leaders, what do you make of this? What do you have to say to them? And what impact is this having on India's war against COVID?
I think it's a question that I'd ask everybody in the country to answer. You know, if we have learned anything from the last year and a bit, what have we learned about this virus and how it spreads? The one thing that we know is that if you gather together unprotected in crowds, you are going to have spread of infection. That's it. We know this, and we need to do something about it.
Well, the question is who is going to bell the cat, because the politicians, Dr. Kang, certainly don't seem too concerned, because political expediency has come before, you know, public health and public safety. Just before I let you go, we've seen, as I was mentioning earlier, about 2 lakh plus cases coming in. Many people say that we've still not hit the peak. It could go up to perhaps 4 lakh cases a day. What is your take on these trends that you're seeing, and when, if at all, in the near future, can we expect either a plateauing or a decline to begin?
I think it's very important to understand that the national peak that we are seeing is, or national trajectory that we are seeing, is made up of lots of individual trajectories that are all at slightly different stages. So Mumbai will not be the same as Bangalore or Chennai. So if you start to see a plateauing in Mumbai, it's possible that Chennai or Bangalore will come a little bit after Mumbai does. And the trajectory that makes up the national trajectory will be determined by how the peaks perform in different regions. This year is very different from last year, because we've had large proportions of the population already exposed to the virus, and we have different variants of the virus that may behave differently. What can I say about where we are today and what the future holds? I think it's a reasonable assumption that things will get worse before they become better. If we just look at what the peak was like in, let's say, the US as an example, they saw over 3 lakh cases a day at their peak. They have a population that is a quarter of ours. So what does this mean? How high could we go? Even if 30 or 40% of the population in India has already been infected, it really means that we could go much further than we are today, well over 2 lakhs a day. But I think the important things that we need to remember is that a lot of control, a lot of spread, a lot of the future is really in our hands and dependent on how we behave. The other reason to hold out hope is that vaccinations are increasing and the treatments that we have today are much better than they were at this time last year.
Well, you said our fight against COVID largely depends on how we behave. So if you have one message that you could tell our politicians, you could tell all our viewers of Mirror Now on how really we should behave, and if we don't, how serious the situation could really get. Dr. Kang, your final thoughts.
I think it's very clear we need to make sure that we wear masks, wear good quality masks, that we stay away from interactions that we don't need, avoid travel as much as possible, get vaccinated whenever the opportunity for vaccination exists. We have the science, we have the public health tools that allow us to address this problem and address it with the least possible damage to our people. And we need to use that.
Well, Dr. Gagandeep Kang, I really appreciate you taking your time out speaking to Mirror Now. We've been trying to get experts from various fields in the health sector to try and speak to our viewers and understand, first of all, how grave the situation is and why there has to be an end to administrative laxity and non-compliance by the people. And as you were saying, data, we absolutely need data, because otherwise, you know, at the government level, at the local authorities level, otherwise there can't really be any informed decision making. Dr. Kang, thank you so much for speaking to Mirror Now.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, here's an appeal, a request to all our viewers. We've seen how bad the situation currently is in our country. It can get worse as well if we don't get our act together now. This is not the time for administrative laxity. This is not a time for non-compliance by people. So please do wear a mask, wear it properly, covering your nose. Please wash and sanitize your hands as frequently as you possibly can. Stay away from large gatherings. Now is not the time for any gatherings of any sort. And if you're 45 and above, if you can get vaccinated, please do get vaccinated. Stay COVID safe and keep your loved ones COVID safe. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of the news. Thanks so much for watching.